This week, I interviewed Tony Evans. Tony is the author of the book Generation AI. He's an absolute expert in leadership, organizational change, and AI. He has a wealth of experience. I really hope you enjoy the interview. I'm delighted to have Tony Evans here. Tony's written a fantastic book called Generation AI, subtitle Leading People and Machines. Now, I bought this book on a holiday. I got back after a 12-hour drive and I read it cover to cover in about eight hours. It's absolutely fascinating. So, Tony, first of all, what qualifies you to write a brilliant book like this?
Thank you. Very flattering comments. So it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me. The first thing, I guess, is being a leader at Meta, as I was for many years. I've managed people for long periods of time, never really given any official manager training. And I think if you look at most execs and ask them, were you ever taught to be a manager properly? The answer is like, well, I had this 2-day course 20 years ago. And that's all we have. And we get thrown into leading other people and having a big impact on their lives. After Meta, or towards the end of my time there, I decided to go back to school and study psychology. And I did a master's in business psychology, which I found absolutely fascinating. And so that kind of prompted me to start looking at different generations and their reactions to leadership. That was my thesis when I was there. And then coming out of Meta, I decided to look more at AI. I was using a lot of AI tools whilst I was on the inside of Meta. The teams were using them a lot. So it made sense to start looking at what are the different attitudes towards technology and particularly AI between older people and younger people in the workforce. And importantly, how can those two be combined together for leaders to have the best forms of teams for the future?
And you worked at kind of Facebook kind of prior to Meta, and you saw that whole, so what was it, about 800 people when you first started there, and you left it when it was tens of thousands? What was the growth like while you were there?
You're right, it was just under 1,000 when I started. I started joined at the end of 2009, started 2010. When I left, it was 80,000, I think was the biggest number that we actually had during that period. So a hell of a lot of growth, and companies changed during that time, So that was a 13-year period, and stratospheric growth that happened during that time, both of their users as well as the people internally.
So the book, let's focus on the book because it is brilliant. Now, what struck me immediately is the different attitudes towards technology from the various age groups, from those at board level to those that are 4 or 5 years old, being born into the world and having technology right on their plate. So can you explain the different age groups and their differences, kind of how they adopt technology depending on their age?
A lot of the academic work on this has been looking at the influence of a couple of things: the time that we're born and the place that we're born. The time that we're born is roughly affected by technology. If you're born during the 1940s and 1950s, you don't have any of the modern technologies that existing children do today. We started to have labor-saving devices in the 40s and 50s, and it meant that things were freed up in the household. So, for instance, washing machines when people didn't used to have them before, microwave ovens coming along later on that sped up the whole kind of process. And if you look at the impact that has on people's lives, the ability of women to work more, for instance, where previously a lot of the labor was kind of pushed onto them. So this changes each generation when they have kind of access to this technology, whatever the technology is. Now, modern technology, if we look at iPads, iPhones, the internet, what kids these days are digitally born with is a very, very different experience of growing up than you or I would have had. So my growing up, for instance, was a computer. ZX81 was the first computer that I had. It's very, very different in terms of power. It was 1K of memory with a 16K expansion pack that my father bought and slapped onto the back of it.
And then the Commodore 64 for next Christmas.
So exactly, the Commodore 64 and the Spectrum on the way through if you were lucky. Yeah. So you could play more games. But if I explain to my son, who's grown up in the era of iPhones, that I only had like 16K, and to get a program running in 16K, a game, when even a modern photo's got a lot more than 16K worth of bytes in it, right? Like, it's a completely different experience. And so that also gives different experience to the apps that could be used in both of them. Having to write 80 lines of code that shut as soon as the computer shuts on a 16K pack, compared to being able to run like many, many apps at the same time with your iPhone, gives a completely different experience in the workplace. So I grew up knowing how to use certain things, and maybe I'm much more linear. I can use one thing, then I can use the second thing, then I can use the third thing. Whereas somebody who grows up today are much more used to using multiple things at the same time. Their exposure to a lot of different programs is vastly different as a result.
And what I found fascinating about the book, and you're saying that people at board level have already been through many, many changes in life. so they're used to change. They're not as scared as change, maybe. Potentially AI might be stretching that a little bit. Whereas people that are kind of between the ages of 15 and 25, AI might be the first change that they're coming across in their life. And that's why there might be this kind of wall of acceptance that things are moving on.
A lot of the work that I do with companies is to understand what do they mean when they talk about AI, because there can be very different perceptions of it. To somebody who's just started using generative AI, and that generative AI is your chat GPT, etc., like that can be their form of AI. But AI has been around for a long time. Like AI has probably been around since the 1950s or so in one guise or another. And so to an engineer who works on the inside of a company, he may be thinking of AI as being machine learning. And that's something which is very, very different. Now, when those two people have a conversation, they look at AI in a very different way. It could be that the leader thinks about AI as being a lot of risk because my company information could be being put into a GPT. Whereas the engineer is thinking, well, I run a machine learning program in Python within a defined environment. I don't have any risk of this at all. And so getting the language right about what we mean when we talk about AI is actually one of the first things that leaders need to do. I think the second thing on this is that leaders need to embrace the fact that this is just change and they're good at it. Back to your point at the beginning, this is just the next thing. We've been through a digital transformation before. AI might be a more accelerated and much more powerful form, but the leader's job is no different than it's ever been. The leader's job in an organization is, how do I get the resources that I have and apply them to the task at hand? How do I lead people through that change? How do I align them? How do I measure? How do I course correct when things go wrong? AI is just the next tool to apply. Now, it's a very powerful tool and they need to learn it. They don't need to be experts in it, but that I think is the job of the leader. And is AI going to replace a leader's job? It's not possible.
So, Tony, when you're working with these corporations and AI is potentially around the corner, when it comes to well-being, how are people feeling about adopting the new technology?
I think it varies between organizations. A really good piece of research that I've seen that I don't think enough organizations know about, they see it for the first time when I talk about it, was some work out of Stanford recently that compared the difference between people who work with AI and people who don't. So this was a study done over a long period of time. It was like a good number of people. I think it's nearly 800 people in the study for Procter & Gamble. And they had 4 sets of people. And these 4 sets of people were person on their own, person with AI, team with AI, 4 different sets, great academic study. And what they looked at and they saw was that person with AI outperforms person with person on their own. We'd expect that. 2 people with AI didn't produce double the work of person with AI, not that much more, right? So person with AI does quite well. Teams without AI didn't really do that well. The most interesting thing for me in this was happiness. If you look at their notions of well-being, they're self-reported, like how comfortable did I feel, how happy did I feel? Teams with AI massively outperformed anyone without anyone on their own or an individual with AI. And I think that's actually really important for the workplace. The fact that people are way happier. There are so many studies that show that happier workplace and happier people at work are more productive. And so if people using AI together, whatever reason it is, are happier, they put this down to, one of their contentions was they put it down to the fact that I can understand a bit more of somebody else's job. So previously, finance person, let's say, and product person, don't really understand each other's jobs that well. AI gives me a chance to actually understand what that person's doing. And so we can collaborate far greater. And this is where I think teams are going in the future. The collaboration and understanding about like different areas makes us far better than the siloed kind of approaches that organizations have had in the past. So I see that within workplace, that more people need to know about that kind of stuff.
And do you think that's because there's companionship while they're working as well as a computer, as opposed to one man and a computer without getting that emotional feedback from your colleagues?
So I think if you look at the difference between the teams who didn't have AI, like they still weren't that happy, right? And so there's something about this third intermediary, which is we're both working with something, right? So we're both working with this tool and we're both inputting into it. Now our output is greater than me and it's greater than you individually. And we've got this third kind of thing. And maybe this relates back to the subline that you mentioned on the book, leading people and machines. This is the difference in the future. The machines are part of our workflow at the moment. At the moment, they tend to be like down the end of the workflow. They tend to be the last thing. Like, let's use it to do the Excel spreadsheet or something after we've done the thinking. Whereas now it's like, how do we integrate it into the process? How do we use it to ideate? How do we use it to be a partner as we're thinking of brainstorming to give us extra ideas? And that's way more powerful, I think, when you've got 2 people with it. And I think that's what makes people happier.
Yeah, that's fascinating because at the moment, I don't think we're thinking about using it as part of a team. It's another part. I think we're using it kind of, as you say, siloed, one to one with a machine, rather than thinking let's put two, three people in a room with AI and let's work together collaboratively with humans and the machine.
It's another team member. You don't trust it as being as good as the other team members, right? You work out where do you use it, but you listen to that voice. So in a brainstorm, are we all going to come up with the best ideas? If you and I brainstorm something, will we come up with all the ideas? A GPT is going to give us another 10 ideas that we haven't thought of, and do it quickly.
I love that idea. It's a fantastic takeaway. I really like the timeline that you put on it from kind of Alan Turing in the 50s, and you showed kind of the different stages of AI up to where we are now. And there was a massive kind of goal for about 20 years where we didn't do much with it. And then now it seems to be kind of accelerated.
I think there's a couple of things that are relevant here. And one is about public consciousness of AI. For most people who hadn't really thought about it or heard about it before, November 2023, when ChatGPT switched on for everyone, was their first experience. And so they've started to think about that moment since then. The technological power has been accelerated because of Moore's law for a long time. And so we've got greater and greater computing power, and that still continues. And so the chips that are being developed by companies like NVIDIA, like they're getting more and more powerful. And so people are realizing a lot can be done for them. I think also coupled with this is education. So if you look at the education and how many people are coming out with engineering degrees, computer science degrees over the past 10 years, you've got more people who are like able to use the power of these chips. So combination of technological power combined with the educational difference that we've seen in the past 10, 15, 20 years is really why we're starting to see a lot of acceleration. Now, I think an interesting thing is going to be what happens for the next 5 to 10 years. There's a lot of talk amongst people publicly around artificial general intelligence, the machines taking over and all that kind of stuff, and whether that's actually possible or when that will be. Now, Elon Musk said that would happen, I think, last year, and clearly it didn't happen last year. I think there's accepted wisdom that computers will be as intelligent as some humans within our lifetimes. And so most people are putting like the voices that I respect are putting that voice about that time about 10 years or so away. Whether we actually do ever achieve that, I think remains to be seen. One of the things that I think we've got to understand is that the human brain is massively complex, not just in returning answers, but in emotions, in the way that we perceive vision around us, like the way we perceive people, the way we form into groups, all of that stuff, like that's going to be immensely difficult to replicate that via a bunch of chips.
And do you think it's potentially the media that is accelerating people's thinking about what's happening as opposed to what is actually happening in reality, where it's a lot slower?
It's all for clicks and clickbait, right? Like that story grabs a lot of attention. If you look at the papers behind some of those stories that make a lot of headlines, you realize there's not much substance to them. So a recent example, MIT paper that was publicized as being GPTs rot your brain. When you actually look at the data behind it, it was a survey of like 1,600 people only in one field and only looking at asking questions in one particular way. And after these headlines came out, the academics behind it were like, hold on a second, that's a working paper. It's not peer reviewed. Like this is not proved, but the headline's already out by that time.
Well, I just asked, was it sponsored at all by any tech company? I'm just, no. Or was it a pure academic paper?
That was a pure academic paper from MIT. And some of those sponsored papers, you're right, like they do have a particular aim and angle. And there's so many good papers coming out at the moment that are really useful to read. One of the ones that I think, back to the point about like, is there an acceleration? One of the ones that's just coming out at the moment from OpenAI has been looking at whether the GPTs can ever get rid of the problem of hallucination. And so hallucination, just for the audience, if they haven't come across it before, is like GPTs inventing answers. Something that's happening within the GPT world at the moment. If you asked ChatGPT back in November 2023 and it didn't know the answer, it would say, I don't know the answer. It doesn't do that anymore because I think OpenAI realized that if they don't return an answer of some sort, you're going to go to Claude, you're going to go to a competitor. And so it's got to return an answer.
Whatever, if you can get an answer.
Exactly. And it's getting things wrong. And it knows that it's getting things wrong, but it's still returning those answers. And so the paper that came out recently was like a mathematical paper looking at why does this actually happen? And when you unpick the paper, you realize that there's a very good chance that this is never, ever going to be solved. It's not physically possible within the world of modern maths to solve the problem of an LLM looking for what is the next most likely answer and get rid of hallucinations completely. So will it be more powerful in 20 years' time? There's a very good chance, of course it will, because of the Moore's law and advancing of chips. is it going to solve everything like the problems we've got at the moment? It's so difficult to do some of those things. And as OpenAI is saying, possibly not.
So because you work with a lot with entrepreneurs, big companies, is it a nice way to start a meeting, or when you first meet them, to explain this just to calm everything down?
It depends on the company, really. So I find people at different stages, and it's not necessarily just an age thing, but different stages in their thinking about, is this a good thing or a bad thing? If we take finance directors, for example, there are finance directors who look at AI as being a cost saver. So this means that I don't need as many people. That means I can cut some heads, right? There are some finance directors who look at it as being, this means that I can multiply the work that the force can do, and we can get far greater output. And there's two different ways of thinking. And I think that it's going to be a little while before people align on what is actually better out of that. I like the second one far more, right? And I think that what we've seen in people who've tried to cut jobs, it hasn't worked out well, right? Like people have had to rehire after cutting jobs thinking that they can get rid of them.
One thing I love about the book, it's so people-centric. It's all about people. You talk about kind of how AI is a machine and it can be useful. It's a tool, it's an assistant. But I love the fact that it always comes back to the people. Now, your specialism is the transformation within companies and adopting technology without necessarily changing the culture of a business, or maybe it does change. How do you do that? What are the biggest kind of walls and barriers that are coming up from these companies not to take on some of the advice?
The biggest barrier is always fear of change, and that's just a very human thing. Like in any situation, the worry about what that means, and also the difficulty, the cognitive difficulty in moving away from what you're doing into doing something else. I help people through that using Kotter's stages of changes. So John Kotter, an academic, has got these stages that are outlined in the book, and it's very simple to follow them. I've realized when I've looked back at changes that I've been involved in and that I've led at the past, when I didn't have that information, I look back and I realize, I missed stage 3, or I never did stage 5. And that makes a big difference. And so this is a thing that I find is incredibly useful to help people through the change. You always get people, I think, who don't want to change. You always get people who find it too difficult. And I think you also get people who are resistant because they worry about what it means for them personally. And there's a lot of that going on with AI at the moment. It is here to stay, right? Like it is an incredibly powerful tool when you partner with it. And I think that's what people would be wise to accept. It magnifies your work. Yes, it makes it a little bit different, but change is really the only constant in life, as we know.
Can you just explain those stages in simple terms? Because not everyone will have read your book yet. Can you just explain those stages, and maybe as you're going through them, some of the issues you're having for people who are taking on those changes?
For sure. So the stages, and there are 8 stages in the change. The first one is create urgency. Help people understand that this is happening, it's happening now, and we need to deal with it. We need to deal with it now, rather than just kind of let it go on for a long period of time. The second is to form a powerful coalition. So you need some people who are going to be helping to lead through this process overall. And so helping to form this powerful coalition of people who are going to be your real instigators within their peers as well. Creating a vision for the change is the third stage. So naturally, from a leader's point of view, you have to have a vision. You have to have a vision of where people are going to go to, and that's got to be coherent with what people can see and where you're actually going to take them. And so creating that vision is the third step. The fourth is communicating that. Now, it might seem strange that like communication could be such a thing, but it's one of the most important things. That you have the greatest vision of the world. If you haven't landed that with everyone, and communication is not just about, I've put a poster on the wall and that's enough. Communication has got to go all the way through to, has that message really resonated and landed with people? So communicating the vision is the fourth stage. The fifth is empowering action, making sure people have the resources in order to be able to act, making sure they have the processes, they have the meetings, whatever it's going to be, to make sure the action that they need through this is going to take place. You've got the feedback loops about what is difficult and what is challenging. The sixth is creating quick wins. It's an important and an early stage when people go through a project to actually see the fruits of their labor. If you don't have anything that doesn't come out for a year, it doesn't come out for 2 years, people will quickly kind of fall away. So creating some quick wins, you can demonstrate that. And that makes this kind of infectious throughout the organization as well. The next thing is to build on the change. So when the change has kind of started, making sure that you then take the time to build on top of what's been going so far. And the eighth stage from Kotter's model is to make it stick. And I kind of suggest a new one for the make it stick. We're in this world that changes all the time, and AI is changing so quickly. Even within the past 6 months, everything's changed so quickly. So I start from the stage of 8, instead of making it stick, to create urgency and start again.
And if it was someone like myself who's incredibly impatient and just wants to get to stage 8 by the end of the week, what is the downside of rushing these processes?
It's having other people ready for the journey, right? I think one of the mistakes that leaders make a lot of the time, and maybe not leaders, but people in their ascendancy, is presuming that as soon as I'm the leader, I can tell other people what to do and they will just do it. And it doesn't work like that. All the CEOs I've spoken to have said exactly the same thing. Like, even with experienced executives, they'll go off and they'll do their own thing. I give an example in the book of the orchestra leader analogy, which is used for the CEO. And people think that it's a case of just like conducting the music very nicely. And the real reality is, one CEO played back to me, he said, it's like the trumpets have decided they want to play the flutes. The drums have decided they're not going to play at all that day. The violins are more worried about like the height of their stands, and the trombones have forgotten their sheet music. And so like, it's not about conducting beautiful music. It's about like dealing with all these problems. And so I think that if you don't bring people on that journey by creating this and making sure that everyone's ready, you're going to leave people behind, or you'll have people who possibly won't be on that journey in the way that you think they are.
So my world is education, and it's very difficult to talk about AI. I'll be honest with you, because they are fearful about their jobs. Now, is this unique to education? Because that's the world I'm kind of submerged in every day. Or do you see that kind of globally when you're working with companies outside of education?
I think education's got some more challenges than other companies. I do see some similar, like parallel challenges within the pharmaceutical world. So if you look at that, it's a very heavily academic world at the center of the research. And I think that within that, because that's a lot of the control of product, et cetera, that happens in those companies, they can be challenged as well to go on the journey of like evolving what they do from the previous power base of like centralized research within a small number of people to a new world of being able to magnify and possibly share that responsibility across wider groups. They're challenged in a different way. In education, obviously, you've got the concern of both, how do I get information across? How do I use AI to mark, potentially, to save time? How do I use AI in exams? But more importantly, how do I judge other students who are doing that? I think as educators, we can think our role would be to make sure that people aren't cheating, for want of a better term, by getting information they haven't really understood and regurgitating it back, right? So if AI is an enabler for that, how should I treat that? The thing that I like, and I've heard in one university recently, and I really like this as a progressive kind of way of thinking about it, is that if you added to a marking rubric for university exams, what has the use of AI been? And so let's say that the basic use of AI is I haven't used it at all. A next level of AI has been, I've used AI to organize my references into the correct order for the APA. If the next level of that is, I've used it to organize references and provide new references that I wouldn't otherwise have found, all the way through to, let's say, a really bad form of AI, which is, I've used it to write my paper, and there are plagiarism checkers for that. So in your marking rubric, like massive penalties, someone who's used it to write their paper, but like possibly good marks for somebody who's used it to organize references and discover more references, otherwise they wouldn't. Many other things that went into that marking rubric, but I really like that as a progressive way of thinking about how could AI be used for educators.
Yeah, I think it's a real game changer when it comes to particularly students with special needs and how they can dig a bit deeper without feeling that they're kind of embarrassing themselves in kind of the wider class. Something that I found fascinating about the book is how my age, we're in our 50s, Tony, and I'm teaching kids who are 14, 15 years old, and how different we see technology, just as a general perception. Can you just kind of give a little bit more feedback kind of about how should we as kind of older people, I say older, but maybe kind of in the prime of our lives, how do we really understand the student experience when it comes to technology and kind of adapting and adopting new technology?
I wonder if we'll ever really understand it. I think that because of our lived experiences for so long have been so different, understanding it truly is going to be difficult. Accepting that it's different, I think, is going to be important. I still feel, and this is personal bias, I still feel that it's really difficult for anyone to multitask and get the most out of things. And so when I watch someone who is able to do email whilst listening to a podcast and having the TV on in the background and doing their homework, I struggle to accept that that's really a thing. Is that personal bias or is that a reality? Like, I don't actually know the answer to that. So I think that we will possibly not be able to understand properly their experience, but I think that we've got complementary skills, and this kind of goes back to the workplace. I think, and working with people. The whole point of the book is that the skills that you've got at one end of the spectrum, when you've got a few grey hairs of the hairs that I have left, when you've got a few of those, like you've got crystallized knowledge of things that have happened to you over many, many years. At the first end of the spectrum, you've got like kids who don't know the embarrassment that it feels when you get something wrong in front of a room full of people in a big presentation. And
do you think that's important to go through that as a to build resilience?
To build resilience, but also to build your skills for like, how do I make sure I don't do that again? Like any older person who's done that, who's felt that, like, because that's how we work as humans, you never want to go there again, right? And so that's the difference between having that little bit of knowledge. The reason it's important for AI is that ChatGPT is being trusted more and more, and it's especially trusted by the younger generation. They believe what is put out in the results. And as we spoke about before on getting things wrong and hallucinations, it's not correct all the time. If that's not thoroughly checked, it's a problem. I've seen this many, many times in the work that I've had outputted from GPTs. It makes things up. I know to check my figures because I've been in rooms where I've got things wrong in front of boards of people before, and it's embarrassing.
And so you don't think that there's enough challenge with ChatGPT? You're just taking it as face value?
Not you generally. The danger is people will. The better or the bigger danger is that younger people will do that more. And so the pairing of young people with older people with the crystallized knowledge, older people don't know how to use it as well as young people, right? They really don't, because they weren't born into that world. However, turning around and saying like, this is not a source of information unless you really know that you can trust it. So how do we check whether we can trust it or not? Have you double checked? Have you triple checked it? Have you checked all the wordings in it? And there are so many examples coming out at the moment where people have run a picture through an AI for an advertising campaign and it's spelt wrong. You know, they haven't even looked at it because they haven't felt that embarrassment before.
Okay, lastly, because I know you are very, very busy. What's the future? Are we going to go into a kind of an office block and it's just going to be full of computers and the people are just twiddling their thumbs in their garden looking for a job? What's the future look like?
I can't see that. I really can't see it, despite what people say, right? Because humans need to connect together. It's what we do and what we've always done. We're in a very small moment in time in the grand scheme of human evolution, right? And naturally, it's going to feel a little bit uncomfortable as we go through this time. But I think we will get through this time very, very easily if we just come back to the normal things about connection and human connection and how do we get better. All of the tools that we've had since the Industrial Revolution through the beginning of computing, like all of these things have helped us to be different but better. And so this is another tool that's going to help us to be different but better. And so no, I don't think it's going to be that. I believe that the advantage will come from the organizations who find a way of becoming learning teams. And a learning team, how do you learn together to be greater than you were before? That will be the difference between the companies and organizations that do really well and the ones that probably get eaten up by the ones that have done that.
Last question. We just got 150 billion pounds of investment for AI infrastructure within the UK. What impact do you think that's going to have long term on the UK? Positive, or is that a question you'd rather not go to?
I really don't know. So I think that it would be a very long answer to that question to see where it goes. I want to make sure that when there's that kind of level of investment, it actually matters and makes a difference to people who need it. You know, so is infrastructure important? It's vital for all of this stuff. But I worry that it is like so many things. It's a defensive move against where this could possibly go. So do I want to see all this development going in the US as a government? Do I want to see all this investment going to China as an alternative? How do I make sure I've got a chip at the table? You know, so I don't know what that money's really going to go on. I really hope it's not going to be wasted, and I hope it's effective.
Okay, great. Well, Tony, listen, thank you so much. Again, your book, I loved it, genuinely. I've got so many notes from the books and I didn't even touch on half of them. But thank you so much for your time. Have a lovely day and enjoy the lovely sun in Dubai.
Thank you for having me.